Michael Rye. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So, where did music start for you?
Music started for me when I was about 5 years old. I had a neighbor who played the violin, and so I thought, well, that looks kind of cool. And I started taking lessons, the Suzuki method. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's basically learning by ear. And one of those little half-size screechy violins that was just, you can't make those sound good. And I did that for probably close to a year. Some of my earliest memory, when you're 5, you don't remember a whole lot of anything, but I remember my first recital. We played a recital at a mall somewhere in Omaha, Nebraska, and for some reason I just got kind of tired of that and switched to guitar at about age 6. And I took lessons at a music store from a guy for about 6 months, and we just rented a guitar, and just kind of going through the Mel Bay series for anybody who's familiar with those. Mel Bay used to be kind of like the method book everybody used, and now it's either Mel Bay or Hal Leonard or one of those. And after about 6 months, my guitar teacher informed me he was going to North Texas State to do his doctorate in music, and he wanted me to meet his guitar teacher. And I thought that was kind of weird, because usually if you're at a music store, they just say, Bill's leaving, Ted's your new teacher or whatever. And so I met this guy. He had his own studio called Guitar Concepts, and I played a few things for him, and he talked to Bill, and he said, yeah, I'll take him on as a student. And so I studied privately with that guy for about 12 years, and then I went to music school after that, and I did my undergraduate at UNO in Omaha, and then I went to Lamont School of Music after that for graduate studies, and that's kind of my schooling history. I've just been kind of a guitarist pretty much my whole life, and I was very driven as a student, and the guy's name was Larry Van Fleet, and he was kind of like a father figure. My own dad was not around a lot, so music was definitely an outpouring of expression. Pretty much everything that was going on in my head came out of guitar. So it's just kind of been a lifelong. I've been fortunate enough to be very, very well educated as far as studying with people and master classes. It's led me into teaching, so it's kind of the background of how I got started on guitar. Was the earliest age, I was practically born with an instrument in my hand.
So it's always just been music, nothing else but just music.
Most of the time, I went straight from high school to music school. When COVID hit, a friend of mine owns a body shop, and I've always kind of dabbled in cars. So when COVID hit, we didn't get to play music or do anything, and so I did that kind of for a couple years, and I'm still kind of part-time. This past year has been really the first time it's picked up, like really felt normal in the music business as far as lessons and people going out and doing things. So this past summer was pretty busy. So I'm hoping, over the winter we don't play as much, so I'm still dabbling in some other stuff. But I'm hoping this spring and summer is just getting back to teaching and playing full time. I'm actually planning on launching a teaching website. It's going to be called Intuitive Guitar Academy. So it's going to be like a website that's a lesson-based curriculum. So you can just kind of click on lessons. And I got into that a little bit with the COVID thing because, we were doing Zoom classes and things like that. And I just thought an interactive website would be kind of a cool thing. So hopefully all that will be up and running in spring and summertime, and we'll be back to music full time. But other than that, that's pretty much all I've ever done is music, and teaching and playing. So.
And then what made you want to create an album and put out an album then?
The story of the album is called If These Hands Could Talk. And my main focus, my studies in school were classical and jazz, which is very instrumental solo guitar. And I grew up listening to, Roy Clark and Chet Atkins. And then I heard some Al Di Meola and Michael Hedges. Kind of changed my whole world when I heard him doing the harp guitar stuff. And so I kind of got into just I really like the guitar because it's a standalone instrument. Guitar and piano are really the only ones that can play a melody and a harmony at the same time. Trumpets are great, but they can only play one note at a time, and singers can only sing one note at a time. So you essentially need to have two friends with you everywhere you go if you want to play any harmony, because you can't play a triad without 3 notes. So a guitar can kind of have that, your thumb can do one thing and your other fingers can do the melody. And so that's really what kind of led me to my style of playing as a solo artist. And with the album being called If These Hands Could Talk, it was just kind of like, I can sing, but I really don't enjoy singing. And for a long time, I didn't really have a chip on my shoulder, but one of the weird things when you play guitar and you say, I play guitar, almost 100% of the time, the first question people ask is, oh, do you sing? And I was like, no, we weren't talking about singing. We're talking about guitar. You know, if you say you play drums, they usually ask, oh, do you play in a band? What kind of drums do you play? You know, what kind of music do you play? They ask you about playing drums or whatever instrument it is. For some reason, guitar kind of has the, you know, the singer-songwriter folk, you know, I'm just going to strum and sing my John Denver song. And so I kind of wanted to go against that grain of there's no talking, there's no anything on this album. It's just 100% guitar. There's actually no overdubs. So whatever you're listening to is just me and a guitar. There's no punch-ins. There's no multi-track anything. It's just a dude and a guitar, and that's what you get. So that was kind of the emphasis behind it, and kind of tried to reflect all my expressions. I do some arrangements of cover tunes. I've got some original tunes, some alternate tunings. Just kind of tried to run the gamut of styles of music and types of things that you can do with a guitar. So
Yeah, I recognized like some of them as covers, and I wondered if others that I didn't recognize the name were originals.
yeah, that's like I did Puff the Magic Dragon was kind of an arrangement I did based on my daughter. I was just noodling around some chords, and she came out. She goes, "Dad, that sounds like Puff the Magic Dragon." I was like, "It kind of does." So we just rolled with that. And While My Guitar Gently Weeps, obviously, you know, it's a Beatles tune. But again, that's the cool thing about the guitar is I can play the bass line, which is a cello, with my thumb, and I can play the harmony, which is all the keyboards, and then the melody. So you can do kind of all of that at once. And being able to pull that off just sitting in a chair with a guitar is, you know, not unique. There's lots of guys who can do that, but that's the style that you don't usually see. So I tried to reflect that with my album and my solo shows. I try and do a little of that, and I do some looping, some things like that. But I really try and show the capability of the guitar above and beyond just being an accompaniment for a singer. You know, so that's.
Now I know most of it sounded like you're saying with your thumb you can keep, and so it's like finger styles. But do you use a pick?
I don't on that album.
Mm-hmm.
I do play. You know, I kind of went through. Back in the '90s, I went through. You know, my heavy metal shredder phase, and you know, I'm a big Al Di Meola fan, so I do a lot of alternate picking. I play in a country band now called New Age Cowboys. That's kind of a rock country smashed together. So we do, you know, some arrangements where we do Folsom Prison Blues, but we put some Led Zeppelin licks underneath of it and just kind of mash some stuff together. So I kind of got into some of the Brad Paisley chicken picking, and that comes real natural because the finger style I have, you know, if you're holding the pick, you've got your pick here, and then these two fingers just kind of naturally do some of the chicken picking, you know, Brent Mason and some of those guys out of Nashville. So that kind of comes natural. So I do a little bit of everything, play electric, play acoustic, and I do a lot of fill-in session work. So I get a chance to play kind of a lot of different styles, which is comfortable for me. I like that. So.
So you said you do session work. Do you do recordings for other people?
I do some recordings, and you know, in today's world, you used to have to go to the recording studio, and now it's just you can PDF files and you can zip things back and forth. So I mean, I've worked for some people I've never even met. They just send me stuff, and I play on it and send it back to them, and it's kind of a weird relationship that way. But you know, way back in the olden days, you know, when you actually had, you know, tape, and you know, you'd actually have to go to the studio and play the parts, and everything's digital now, and they can cut and splice and move things around. So it's definitely a unique system, but I prefer playing live over studio stuff. But you know.
Yeah. How do people get a hold of you, like to do studio stuff?
Usually it's either through references or you know, I've got michaelryemusic.com or Michael Rye Music on Facebook. So, and a lot of it's just, you know, somebody will see you playing or through a lot of word of mouth or friend of friend, you know, like, hey, I know this guy who can cut some stuff. And I'm a pretty fast study because of the background that I have. So, you know, if you send me something, and as long as I know what key signature is in and have a reference track, I can usually, you know, with recording, especially studio time, people don't want to pay you to practice. They want you to come in and play it right. And they're paying for that rental space or that studio space, so they don't want to pay you to be there any longer than you have to. So
Right.
that and once you work with a studio, they kind of there's 2 or 3 studios that are in the Midwest that kind of know, hey, we could call this guy in for this. So a lot of it's just doing it and showing up and getting it done on time and making a good product, and referrals are key for that.
So now with that band you're with now, do you play local mostly?
Yeah, we go through throughout the Midwest. I mean, we'll go to Kansas City, Des Moines, but mainly Omaha, Lincoln area. Sometimes up to Sioux City to play. They've got a couple spots up there. There's a Hard Rock Casino up there, but we kind of about 100-mile radius. I mean, sometimes we'll go further than that, but it's pretty much Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas area.
And then you said you're starting a online like tutorial kind of, or how is that working? Or
Well, it's going to be an actual curriculum, because I was thinking, there's so many websites you can. I was watching something by Brett Mason, who I don't know if you're familiar with. He's just a monster player out of Nashville, and he was kind of showing like, hey, I can do this, and he didn't really explain it. And I mean, if you were a really high level player, you could go like, oh, I kind of see what he did there. But if you were, starting out, that's just going to be like, a little over your head. So, but I want to make it to where you can kind of start from the beginning if you want to, but if you're more advanced. So every episode or every lesson is going to have basically 3 levels. There's going to be kind of an introductory level, I guess a mid-level, and then an advanced level. And the way I came up with this concept was my wife was doing P90X. I remember the exercise video,
I remember
and
that.
they had like the guy doing push-ups on his knees, and then they had the guy doing regular push-ups, and then they had the guy in the back doing one-arm push-ups. It's like, okay, well, you can find your spot. So if I give you an exercise, like here's a technical exercise, I'll say, okay, here's the introductory level, here's kind of the medium level, and then here's an advanced level. So it'd be basically the same exercise, whether it's a technique thing or a theory thing. Here's the notes of the major scale, here's added additional notes for your chords, here's additional things you can borrow from other keys, so you can kind of take it at your own speed. And there'll probably be like 10 lesson segments in each block. So these 10 are kind of the introductory one, then you can go to the next one. And so I'm going to have different categories for technique and theory, and kind of you can sort of choose and make it fit yourself. So if you're just never even picked up a guitar, you can get something out of it. And if you're a more advanced player, you can say, oh, well, I can ramp up this exercise to make it fit where you're at. So that's kind of the structure that I'm looking for, and recording all of that and getting it all up and rolling so you can release it is pretty time consuming, but hopefully the next couple months that'll hit the interwebs and be out there, and it'll be called intuitiveguitaracademy.com.
So you've already recorded all of the recordings?
I've got most of them done, and I'm working with a website development company here in Lincoln. So I've got the domain name and the structure, and it's basically just inserting all the stuff. And I send them everything. Like I said, I'm the least techie guy in the world, so I just basically like get all this information on a cool looking website and make it accessible. So that's kind of the stage I'm at, is sending them things and then going through the final, I guess, approval of how everything clicks, and the paywall for, it's going to be kind of like a Netflix account. You just pay, and then you get an access code, and you can access whatever you want on the website for, a monthly fee. So getting all that set up, and like I said, I think a lot of them were very unorganized, or it's just guys showing you riffs, or, hey, this is a cool song. And so I kind of wanted to make it more like the lesson structure, as if I was teaching you live. This is kind of what I go through. And then obviously, I'm not in their living room, so they have to have some ability to go at their own speed, or, and the nice thing is, my studio in Lincoln, I got to get students to come here, and, scheduling conflicts, and, the internet, you can be in Sweden and sign up on a website, and you can watch it whenever you want, and you can rewind it and watch it again. So there's some definite benefits to it, and it gives me access to the whole world, so, and then that, if I'm doing any traveling, it's kind of a portable teaching. I can record a lesson from a hotel room pretty much anywhere. So that's gives me some flexibility, and my travel schedule and playing can kind of go along with the two of those. So.
Now, will there be like work to do in between lessons? Will you give them like something to do to work on between the first and second lesson?
Yeah, my plan is to actually have some printable PDF files so you can have kind of like, here's where you start, and then here's. I don't necessarily want it to be like a method book, but they'll definitely be kind of like, I usually give everybody, in a live lesson, you're with me for a half hour, and I say, okay, here's the things you need to practice. Practice these for 30 minutes a day or an hour a day or whatever it is, and we'll see you next Tuesday at your lesson. So I kind of want to set it up the same thing, like, okay, in lesson one, do these things. Here's your practice structure, and kind of give them, I'm going to have a printout so you can keep track of your practice and everything, because that's the key thing is, you know, a dedicated practice time, and having some, just noodling around while you're watching TV isn't the same as practicing. When you sit down and learn the guitar and learn where the notes are, and guitar is one of those instruments where the education is pretty far behind. If you take piano lessons, you learn to read music. You usually take lessons. If you take lessons in school or you're in band, you learn to read music. You learn the instrument. You have a class. You meet every day. Guitar is just kind of one of those. Oh, I'm self-taught. Well, that's great, but would you go to a doctor that's self-taught? It's like, oh, what's some online courses? I got this down. It's like, I can get that gallbladder out, no problem. So there's a lack of education from the guitar standpoint that I'm kind of trying to work against. And I guess, learning more can never hurt you. I've heard a lot of guitar players like, oh, I just play by feel. Well, if you're not thinking about what the notes are and how everything fits together, you can have a lot more room for feel, because I have more skills and more abilities and more knowledge of the instrument. Well, then I can make it say what I want to a lot easier than if you don't really know how everything fits together and you're just kind of reacting to the notes. My teacher used to say, he said, hearing is because a lot of times people, they say, oh, I play by ear. Well, hearing is the very last step of playing. So if you heard a wrong note, everybody else in the it's already happened. You can't fix it. So hearing should be kind of the validation of, if this is an A minor chord and I know I want to play the C as the minor third and it's going to sound sad, and then you play it and it sounds sad, you go, yep, that's what I wanted. Instead of playing it and then going, ooh, I hope that turned out okay, or that wasn't what I wanted, and trying to fix it. So my approach is kind of like a lawyer, don't ever ask a question you don't know the answer to, so I kind of don't ever play a note that you don't know what it's going to sound like. And that's, noodling around and kind of, discovering things is fine. But if you're actually performing, you're on stage, you kind of want to know what's going to happen. And even in an improvisational setting, you should have enough of a structure to where, like, and we've all made mistakes. I've definitely climbed too far out on the branch in an improv, in a jazz world, and they're like, oh, I need to get back to, center. And, but having that fundamental thing, that's kind of my whole teaching approach, is to say, whatever you're doing, the more you know, the more it can help you. So that's kind of the aspect of everything I do as a player and a teacher is, the more you know, the better off you are.
So, say, like me, I have never even played a single note on a guitar. Like, what would
Mhm.
be the base? What would be the first thing I should do?
Well, the first thing I would do is I give everybody a technical exercise that just shows you where your hand should be. Because the number one thing I think that people do is they think I hear all the time, oh, I don't have big enough hands, or my hands aren't strong. Um, you want to get a decent instrument so that you don't, because if the strings are really high and you got to smash them down, that can be a problem. So start off with at least a playable instrument. But the number one thing to do is you take an exercise, just kind of get your hand, like, to demonstrate, would be just kind of in the middle of the guitar and just play your first, second, third, fourth finger, and get them to be as in a row as you can and just as relaxed as you can. The bare minimum of effort. So that's kind of get your hand in the right position on the guitar, because you see a lot of guys, with their thumbs hanging over. Well, if your thumb's hanging over, your fingers are kind of behind the neck, and that makes it really hard. If you bring your wrist out, your fingers just end up right over the strings. So getting a good hand position, and then just starting at the first string, learning some of the notes, and then kind of working the first through 6 strings, learn where the notes are, learn some chord shapes, and within probably 2 to 3 weeks, you can be playing some recognizable chords. And everything is technique and theory are the two things. Theory is basically the names of the notes, the chords. Technique is the hand position. So I break it down into technique is how you play, theory is what you play. And with anything you're going to learn, if you know what to do and how to do it, that's all there is. So the very first part I start is let's learn some of the notes. Let's get your hand in the right spot and kind of get a really good foundational basis. And then sky's the limit. And I always tell all my students, I said, it's however much you practice and what you put into it is what you get out of it. If I hire a personal trainer and he gives me this great exercise program and I sit on the couch eating bags of potato chips and watching TV, and then I yell at him like, "Oh, I'm still fat." I'm like, "Well, what'd you do this week?" So, the number one thing is I get students coming like, "Oh, I didn't have time to practice this week." And it's like, I did, and that's why I'm in this chair and you're in that chair. So it comes down to, there's got to be a work ethic, and I had some natural ability. Like I never, I think anybody can learn, but I think there are definitely, some people can run faster, or they're better at math or whatever. I did have a natural aptitude for guitar that just seemed to be a comfortable thing for me to play. And I was also very driven. I practiced, remember in grade school I practiced an hour before school and an hour after school, and then when I was in college it was nothing for me to spend 4 hours a day playing instruments or studying or something like that. And I was also teaching and performing. So there's a lot of they call it seat time if you're a pilot. There's a lot of time with a guitar in my hands. So the number one thing is have a good foundation, and then have a consistent practice schedule. So
What's a good first song to learn?
oh, I try to make it. I always try and pick something that the student can relate to. So there's quite a few. I'm old enough to remember. I really loved Dust in the Wind. It's kind of a real recognizable thing. For a while it was Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. Everybody knows Iron Man and Smoke on the Water. Those are the kind of the traditional ones. But I usually try and pick something that the student likes. And surprisingly, if you ask them, like, hey, what made you start playing guitar, or what kind of music do you like? You usually get like I don't know, you just kind of this blank stare. I was like, well, something had to make you play guitar. And I remember I felt really old one time because I showed somebody this blues run, and I told him, I said, oh, it's the Stevie Ray Vaughan scale. I said, he uses it in all his songs. And this guy was like, who's that? I was like, wait a minute, you're taking guitar lessons and you don't know who Stevie Ray Vaughan is? And that was just kind of, I guess, wow, I'm really an old fart now. Nobody knows who Stevie Ray is. Yeah. And so trying to find something that, fits their what they want to play and what they want to listen to, but something that uses those entry level chords. And if you're into country, there's about a zillion country things that just use your basic chords. So you can kind of pick and choose, a little blues riff or something like that. So get them playing something they know, and that everybody else knows. It's easily recognizable, because when they can play something and mom and dad go like, hey, wow, I recognize that, they're a lot more apt to support the kid. If it's if it's an adult, then you can sound like the stuff you want to play. And having success and being able to play something that people recognize is a good feeling and makes you want to practice more, because like, oh, I'm getting somewhere now. So
Do you ever have like a big range? Do you have like younger kids and then you have middle-aged people?
yeah, the oldest student I ever had was 80. I think he was 84 years old, and he was a banjo student. And I didn't play banjo at the time. And the music store that I was teaching at came down there like, hey, we got a guy who wants to take banjo lessons. And since I played fingerstyle, I said, okay. So I got myself a banjo, and I got myself a banjo book, and I tried to stay a couple pages ahead of him. But he was just a retired old guy, and it was kind of cool, because it made me have to pick up a new instrument. And banjo's kind of weird, because the highest string is where the lowest string on a guitar is. So normally my thumb plays all the bass notes, and on a banjo, all your rolls and everything are completely backwards. So it really kind of made me have to flip my brain around. So there's still kind of a learning curve. I'm not a banjo, I'm not a terror on banjo, but I'm functional. So, but that was kind of cool. He was just an old guy. And then I've had, probably 6 or 7 is about as young as you can start. And you can't expect a lot from, half hour is a long time to be locked in a room with a 7-year-old and an out of tune guitar. So there's definitely times where you're looking, it's like, well, this lesson should be about done. And you're like, oh, it's been 8 minutes. What are we going to do now? So don't have great expectations, with the super young kids, and kind of run the gamut. I've had some guys who've gone on to go to music school. I've got, some students that have been with me for a long time. It was kind of cool. I just had a guy send me a video of he's playing in the jazz band at North Dakota State. He said, "Hey, I just auditioned for the jazz band, and I haven't seen the guy in about 3 years now because he's been out of state." But that's kind of cool. It's like he had some impact. It's like I gave this guy tools to go make the jazz band at North Dakota State. So that was it's cool to you have some sort of not necessarily a legacy, but you're having some impact, and it's validating. Like, okay, well, what I'm doing must be working and making some impact. So that's kind of cool and rewarding. And my mom was a kindergarten teacher, so I might have just gotten that sort of teacher vibe from her for growing up next to a teacher. So that's kind of rewarding when you can make an impact on somebody. And
I think it'd be hard to have all the knowledge and then be able to make it for someone who's just beginning. Like if I know something, it's like I want to tell them all complicated, it's like, well, you do this, it's hard to like take it to their level just beginning and explain it to them.
it is, and that's one of the things, like I referenced that Brent Mason thing. Like he didn't really explain anything he was doing, and it was just like, okay, it's hard to decipher that. So, and I know some great players who are not good teachers. Like I've done a couple master classes with Al Di Meola, and Al, I don't know if you're familiar with him at all, but he's just a masterful player and just ridiculously talented. But he doesn't relate to somebody who doesn't, if you're approaching his level or you can relate to him, like just here's how you play a basic C chord shape doesn't enter his head. Like he just doesn't relate to that very well. And I know some guys who are really good teachers and they're not the greatest players because the majority of your lessons are kids, younger people, or hobbyists. I was the guitar professor at Grace University for about 6 years, and then they closed. And it was a little private school, and of course the music programs get cut first, and then the whole university closed after that. But there's a difference between teaching a college level person who wants to be a guitar performance major and make a living playing guitar, and either a 12-year-old kid or somebody who just wants to play guitar for fun or play at church. That's two totally different things. And relating that differently, you don't want to be too harsh with them. And there's definitely a learning style, and you have to kind of learn people's, how do they learn? Some people are visual. Some people you have to write it down. Some people you show it. I had one guy who he said, "Can I bring a recorder and just record the lessons?" And I would play all of the examples for him, and then he could listen to them throughout the week. So, and with the website, I'm going to try and incorporate a little bit. Like here's a PDF if you want to print it out and look at it. There'll be some videos of me playing it, so if you want to watch me play it, so there'll be all those different styles because people do learn in different ways. There's definitely, my wife is a visual learner; she has to write it down, and I'm not. If I'm writing down, like I can't take notes at a lecture. If I'm writing down what you say, I'm not listening to what you say. So for me, I'd rather listen and then just write down a couple really important points, and then. But my wife's the exact opposite. She'll write down the whole thing, and then that helps her remember. So that's.
So have you ever wanted to put out more music?
Yes, in fact, I'm actually about halfway through recording a Christmas album, and I had dreams of getting it done this Christmas, and just with we moved in June, and just with the pile of stuff, I would rather rather than try and cram things and make it a time crunch. I figured, what, Christmas happens every year, so and when we were moving, the way this came about was my wife. We lived in a smaller place, and I kind of kept all my guitars in like. I had this sort of closet under the stairs, the Harry Potter closet, and all the guitars basically stayed there, and I would just take the ones that I needed for a gig or a lesson. And when we were moving, she asked me, she's like, "Well, how many guitars do you actually have?" I was like, "Don't worry about it. Just keep putting them on the truck." And so she was like, "You should do an album called The 12 Guitars of Christmas and play every song on a different guitar." And so it's evolved into, I'm going to do each song on a different type of guitar and make it a different type of music. Because with a Christmas album, you can kind of run the gamut of anything because they're all songs that people are so familiar with. You don't really have to have a style, with if you're going to be in the country lane, you got to kind of stay country. So my plan there is like I did Feliz Navidad on a nylon string. It's kind of real Latin beachy and got a lot of percussion. I'm going to do I did like Jingle Bell Rock, kind of 50s, like the Brian Setzer sort of Stray Cats type thing on, the big Gretsch. So each one's going to be a different guitar, and each one's going to be a totally different arrangement. So I did like Silent Night, I did as a fingerstyle acoustic piece, and it's really kind of mellow and subdued. And so each one's going to kind of be its own little style, and then each one will be played on a different guitar, and the 12 Guitars of Christmas. So I haven't got the album totally fleshed out as far as which songs are going to go where yet, but I've got 6 songs kind of recorded, and then I'm hoping to have everything recorded by the spring, and I can do all the mastering and come out with it next fall. So that would be my plan for that. So, and that will be not just guitar. There's going to be drums and keys, and just because the style, I'll have full band behind there, and so it won't just be guitar, but it'll be all instrumental. So there's no vocals on it. Just, I can sing. I sing reasonably well, but I have no passion for it, and whenever I'm singing, I don't feel like I'm playing guitar as well as I can. So it's just like I sing like with the band. I sing like one song a set, and that's about it. And the rest of it's just guitar fireworks, and that's my job.
So do you have more than 12 guitars, or are you just doing 12 guitars at Christmas?
There's more than 12, but a couple of I'm trying to make 12 completely different. Like I have one guitar that's I don't know if you're familiar. Have you seen those cigar box guitars? They usually have like 3 strings.
Yeah.
I have one of those that the studio I used to teach at shared space with an art studio, so there was paintings, and this guy had cigar box guitars. He had a little display, and this cigar box guitar actually is made of a dog bowl, and it's kind of like a resonator guitar, and it's an upside down dog bowl and 2 shower drains in this box that used to be his family barn. So it's like the siding from his barn, and it was just the coolest, swampiest sounding, just bluesy Louisiana sounding thing. So just styles like that. I've got nylon string guitars from my classical stuff, kind of an arch top jazz. So I'm kind of just trying to use all the different. I've got some 7-string guitars that have an extra low B on them, so I've got extended range. So kind of just try and make every different type of guitar. I have a few more than 12, but I'm trying to play all the ones that are totally different. So we'll see how many actually make the album. It might be there might be a bonus track on there, the 13th, day of Christmas or something. So, because I've got a couple weird guitars that may have to make the cut, or I'm not really going to play anything on banjo, but she was like, "Oh, you should play a banjo song." Bluegrass Christmas. So we may throw a hidden bonus track on there and play a banjo tune or something crazy, but
Do you have one that you don't play and you just keep because it's like you're too nice?
No, I really don't. I don't have a strange attachment, and I don't really have a collection. Like pretty much all of the guitars I have are pretty different. I have a couple of electrics that are kind of, I would say, similar, but I've got like a gypsy jazz guitar. It's got the smaller sound hole, kind of like that Django Reinhardt stuff. Like if you watch a movie, where there's Sidewalk Cafe in Paris, that kind of real nasally sounding guitar stuff. I've got some of those. I've got some nylon strings. So they're all pretty different, kind of unique, and they're all pretty, I guess, utilitarian. Like I've been fortunate enough to, I've got a lot of really upper end custom made, hand built guitars because I've worked with builders, but they're all pretty much geared towards something I can go to work with, So I know a buddy of mine was like, I've got 10 Telecasters. I was like, I don't need 10 of those, So I have a lot of guitars, but they are pretty different in functionality, and that's kind of what I go for is, can I do something different with this guitar and that kind of makes me a good utility player, to where if someone says, I just did a recording for a Mexican restaurant. Well, I can grab a nylon string and go play some Spanish flamenco, style stuff. Or if somebody says, hey, we're doing a heavy metal rock type thing, I can go throw a screaming 80s lead on whatever it is. I did a ballad that this lady sent me, and she goes, I kind of want that 80s hairband power ballad guitar solo. I was like, okay, so I try and pick the guitars I need for that and take them to work and let them do their thing. So they're all very functional.
All right. Do you have multiple like amps?
Um, I do. I use Hughes and Kettner amps, and I've used them for about the past 20 years. So I'm pretty particular about this is my sound. And I have a couple different amp cabinets, but for the most part, my guitar rig is pretty much the same. I'm kind of a digital guy. That way, it's super consistent. I know some guitar players have tons and tons of pedals, and always, I kind of program most of my sounds. I've got a pedal board that's 3 feet wide and more stuff than I need, but for the most part, I kind of have about 4 or 5 go-to sounds that here's kind of a clean sound, here's a distorted sound for more rock type stuff, got kind of a punchy country sound. So within that 5 or 6 tones is pretty much where I live most of the time. And then if you're playing Barracuda by heart, then you got to have a flanger, sort of that one for that one song or something like that. I've got some of that stuff, but for the most part, it's a pretty simple, repeatable, plug and play setup, because when you're dragging it around, and I played 3 shows last weekend, I don't want to have to do any more work than you have to. And when you're playing a club till 1 in the morning, the last thing you want to do is tear down for another hour and a half. So back in my younger days, I used to bring 6 guitars, and I had this big stack, and now it's like, I'm too old for that crap. I bring 2 guitars, and that's and one of the things we try and contract where if we're playing a casino or something, they have sound and lights there, so we don't have to set up a whole lot of stuff. So it's just kind of walk in, set up your own backline gear, and be done. So some of it I think is just trying to streamline the process and make it repeatable and consistent. That way, especially venues and sound people love that when you're just like, you can plug in, do sound check, and you're not, trying to find the gremlin. Oh, this didn't work, or this cable's bad, or whatever. So I really try and pride myself on having everything just be as smooth as possible and kind of sound the same every time. So, but Hughes and Kettner's been really good to me. So I got to plug them, and Kurt Mangan strings are the only ones I use. So I try and, that's the other thing is I always tell people, surprisingly, guitar players don't change their strings nearly often enough. I get like students that, I broke a string. It's like, well, when did you change them last? When I got the guitar. It's like, oh, well. So strings are kind of like changing the oil in your car. You got to do that, and I never really picked up on that, but I met Kurt, and he's one of the few people I know that's really passionate about guitar strings, but he made a good point. He said, the string is actually what makes your sound. So the guitar itself is important, but the string is actually what is producing the sound. So I found that kind of fascinating, that the string itself is what really vibrates and makes the sound and gets things where they need to go. So, and he's been very good with all the different guitars I have. I use different types of strings, and I had a 7-string acoustic built not too long ago, and they don't make 7-string acoustic sets. So I called him up and I was like, well, I need an extra low string. And he's like, oh, well, you might want to try this, this phosphor bronze alloy, and we'll try, this is a 68 millimeter, this is 70. So he just made me like 5 strings and sent them to me and said, pick which one you like, and then we'll just, we'll start making those for you. So it's kind of cool to have relationships like that where you can really dial in your sound, and it makes doing this pretty I wouldn't say easy, but it's kind of nice when you can have the consistent tone and sound, and be as professional as you can, and get in and out of venues quickly, and sound checks over quickly, and that's always nice.
So with the strings, then, how do you know? Do you just do it every month, 3 months? Do you know? Can you tell, hear?
You can kind of hear. You can also feel. Like I know some people who just have, it could be like the oil in their hands. Some people really get grimy strings quickly. I don't really have that problem, being that I change my strings probably on my main guitars. There's probably 3 or 4 guitars where I probably change them every week to 2 weeks at the most. Like the 2 weeks would be a long time for some of my main guitars that I play a lot. And it depends on, like, if we're playing an outdoor show, we played after a rodeo, and everything's covered in dust, so pretty much your strings are shot after that weekend. And then there's guitars like, I don't play my nylon string guitar as much because it's just not what I do most of the time. So it'd be probably once a month, sometimes a little longer than that. But it depends on how often you play the guitar. And I like brand new strings. It's kind of like carpet. You don't realize how dirty your carpet is until you replace it, and you're like, oh wow, I was laying on this with the dog. So you don't really, you take them off and you're kind of like, oh, these were pretty grungy. So, and it's a good chance to, once you take the strings off, you can clean the guitar a little bit, because definitely they get some build up and some stuff on the fretboard. So it's regular maintenance. So
Do you have your, like when you buy a guitar or have your guitar, do you have it sent off and um, like set up or
I do most of the little things, changing strings and basic setup stuff. I have a guy in Omaha that basically he used to work for Gibson's Custom Shop, and he does most of my setups. I'm pretty fortunate, like most of my guitars are, like I said, I had the one custom built. I'm having a 7-string Telecaster made, which Telecasters don't normally have 7 strings. And so I had somebody build me, I've been playing 7-string guitars, which has the extra low B, so it kind of gives me a lower range for some of the fingerstyle stuff I do. And then I started doing electric stuff because a lot of the country stuff uses baritone guitars, and they're just extended range is kind of cool from different chords and things that you can do. And Telecasters are kind of the industry standard for country music, and everybody was giving me a hard time, like, you need to get a Tele if you're going to play in a country band. I said, well, if they start making 7-string Teles, then I'll get one. And this buddy of mine builds Telecasters, like a custom builder, and so I called him up and I was like, hey, you want a bit of a project? And he said, yeah, sure. So most of that you can kind of tell them, dial it in, and it's pretty well set up. But so there is a lot of I guess collaboration with the custom builders. You can kind of have it set up the way you want. And for anything, they do have some regular maintenance, especially in the Midwest. You got hot and cold weather, so I definitely have I have my shop in Omaha where I take it and kind of have a little routine where this one goes in and the next one. So if you have to pay for all 15 setups at once, you try and rotate so you're not all in the shop at the same time. But the routine maintenance, string changes, and just little tweaks, I can generally do myself. But there's definitely a maintenance involved in them.
so do you listen to a lot of music other, like than what you're playing at the time? Do you listen to the radio a lot? Do you try and find new music?
It's kind of a combination. I listen to, being that I'm playing a country band, I try and find some new hot country stuff. I really gravitate towards instrumental stuff, but I do try and be aware of, what's going on in all of the music world. Just because, from a lesson standpoint, you may have somebody, hey, have you heard this? And I try and be up on pretty much whatever's going on. And I listen to every style of music. I mean, my playlist, I was a huge Iron Maiden fan in high school. I still love those guys. So, I mean, I'll be listening to Mozart 1 hour, Iron Maiden the next, some crazy country chicken picking thing the next. So I kind of run the gamut for every style of music, and I'm always listening to music. And I'm not a huge fan of Spotify, but I get enough work. So a lot of times my learning process is, if I'm doing a fill-in gig for a band, I'll just make a playlist and just kind of listen to the music, absorb it, and a lot of the stuff you've played, you play a lot of the same songs. If you're doing a country gig, you can play Neon Moon and Boot Scootin' Boogie, and it's like, I've played those songs plenty of times to where that's just kind of a freebie. But there's my playlist on Spotify is pretty wide and diverse. So, and I'm always listening for new stuff and new guys, and I've kind of gotten into some of the progressive rock. There's a lot of that from overseas. There's a group called DGM that is just ridiculously talented, and it's not real. It's very intense music. Like, you kind of have to pay attention because there's lots of time signature changes, and it's real complex. So it's not, sometimes you just want to put on a Green Day album and, just sort of rock out and kind of mindless. And some of that albums, you really have to kind of like listen. I don't know are you familiar with Dream Theater at all?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're 17-minute, those guys are all over the place. You know, it's not necessarily an easy listening. You just put it on the background, and it's like that. That's not really what that music's for. So I kind of sometimes I want to sit there and zone out, and so it doesn't have to be super complex to be impressive, but I tend to gear towards people who have a little more, I guess, virtuosity in their playing. But so I can stand about everything. So not a huge fan of rap, but it's.
Not a lot of guitar in rap either.
No, there's very little guitar. So the grunge era was really tough for me because I went from like the hair metal where everything had a guitar solo, and then we had like grunge. There was no guitar solos at all, which is kind of why I got into the country thing because I was like, what do I do? There's nothing going on in a Pearl Jam song, or and they're probably the best of the bunch, but some of the Nirvana stuff, it's like there's very little guitar. So all these great players were down in Nashville. I was like, oh, okay, I'll go do some of that. And then there was kind of a resurgence with some of the players coming back, and like the Dream Theater guys, and but they've always kind of been out in left field because the stuff is really, really hard. You don't hear a lot of people covering, even like a group like Rush. You don't hear a lot of people covering Rush because it's very difficult to play. But everybody can play "Smells Like Teen Spirit," So there's definitely a different level there of skill that's required to cover those tunes. So
Now, have you ever gone out and say like thought about moving out of Lincoln?
I have actually. Um, Without getting into a big sob story, I actually auditioned for the Air Force band in Langley, and they were called the Blue Aces, which was like their top band. And I went out there, flew out there, auditioned, and so I was going to kind of do the East Coast and the Air Force band thing. They go all up, and it was kind of cool. I worked with them a little bit, got to play with some of the national acts, and some Craig Morgan and some of those. We actually got to open up for Toby Keith with this group, and my now ex-wife, but my wife at the time was not on board with that, and so she basically said, like, I don't want to move to Virginia, and I don't want to be married to a guitar player. And so at that point, I decided, well, I have 3 kids, so I'm going to stay in Nebraska and be a dad because I didn't want to do the 1,200-mile. I could have taken the gig and seen my kids for 2 weeks over the summer, and I was just like, I'm not doing that. So miraculously, I flew back to Omaha, and that was when Grace University just out of the blue called and said, hey, would you be interested in a faculty position here? And I was like, now that you mention it, I would. So the Air Force thing took a weird twist, and then I was in Omaha, and then Grace University closed. I moved to Lincoln, taught down here, and I do have some thoughts of moving somewhere. I got some friends down in Austin that keep telling me I need to go down there. I have another friend who plays on cruise ships, and I'm seriously considering that because my background fits really well with all the different styles I play. I read music very well, so I think I would fit kind of what they're looking for. So I have some considerations, and he does that about 6 months out of the year, and then he does summertime. He does workshops and festivals and things like that, and then when the weather gets crappy, he goes and hits the cruise ships again. I'm like, well, that might not be a bad way to go. So my wife and I are actually going on a cruise the first week of February. So I'm going to feel out like, okay, could I do this for 3 months at a time and be on one of these boats and just see what the whole thing's about. So I have some, we'll just see kind of where everything goes. And that's kind of the motivation with the website too, is because even if I'm doing something like that, I can still, the web-based stuff can go wherever I go. So I'm not tied to Lincoln and teaching here necessarily. So
So
I'll have to.
you
Oh,
still
go
have
ahead.
students there like
Yeah,
that come?
I still have some private students, in person students. So we're just kind of I'm just kind of seeing where things go now, and letting the band just signed with an agent, so they're booking us quite a bit and trying to do some bigger shows. So I guess we'll kind of seeing where things go, and playing as much as I can throughout the Midwest, and next year should be interesting to kind of see where things take off and getting the Christmas album out. And so I got a lot of stuff going on, but I'm definitely not opposed to going somewhere, hopefully a little warmer. I was born in San Diego, so this cold weather is it's not too bad today. It was like 60 today, but
Oh,
you
that's
get,
pretty good. I think
yeah,
it got in the 50s here today. So
Yeah. So, but last week when it was 14 degrees, I was like, okay, what am I doing here? So,
So again, so what's the website going to be called?
it's going to be intuitiveguitaracademy.com will be the lesson website. So
And it's for anybody, beginning or advanced.
anybody, it's going to be designed to where you can have never touched a guitar and you could be a pretty advanced player and still hopefully have something for everybody and kind of go at your own speed and be a kind of a self tutorial, but it's going to be a very, hopefully, very organized step by step to where it's not just kind of random videos of, hey, check this cool riff out. It's going to be kind of a real structured approach to learning the instrument because I was fortunate enough to where I really had the guy that I studied with privately graduated from Berklee School of Music, so I went through basically that curriculum between age 6 and 18, and then I went to two different music schools, so I really had a foundation of educational experience, and I kind of try and bring that to my own teaching style of, if you think about, when you read a book, you're not thinking of the letters of the alphabet or anything like that, but all of that spelling tests and reading tests and all that stuff that you did for years, now you just pick up the newspaper and you just read, you read the sports section, you already know ahead of time, oh, I'm going to be reading about sports. And sometimes people, I use a lot of weird examples in my teaching that take stuff that people already do. If and the whole intuitive guitar academy, if something's intuitive, you just do it automatically. So I always tell people, I said, if you are playing baseball and you hit the baseball, you automatically intuitively run to first base. Well, at some point in time, you had to learn to walk, and you're so far past that you're not thinking about what your feet are doing, but your brain has to tell your legs. I mean, you can't move your legs without a signal from your brain telling your legs to move. But you're not thinking about running. You're thinking about, can I go to second base? Am I out? Do I have to, you're thinking about all the other things, but your brain is still telling your feet what to do. So I'm trying to make the approach to the guitar is like, you can remove the thought process of the names of the notes and where your fingers are and only think about the music, and the rest of it is intuitive. There's a difference between, instinct is running away from a bear. You really don't care where you're going. And intuitive is knowing I have to run to first base. I'll see if I can go to second base. Can I, so there's two different things. So that's kind of my whole approach to music in general is forget all the know-how behind it because that's just intuitive or automatic. And then you can think about the sound that you want. Do I want to make a happy song or a sad song, or what can I say through the music? Because that's really what music is about. Is especially with the instrumental stuff, a songwriter can say, I'm sad because my pet died. Well, if I write a sad song, I don't have any words to say that. So instrumentally, I try and really get the point across. There's a song on my album called Sunrise that I played a show, and I had somebody come up afterwards and they're like, you played this one song, it just really made me think of like a sunset or a sunrise. I said, that would be probably the one I called Sunrise. And he was like, yeah, it just sounded like it just made me really think of like a sunset or a sunrise or something like that. And I said, well, that's pretty cool because I was sitting by a lake watching the sunrise come up over the lake, and that's when I wrote that song. So when you can kind of make that feeling go through the music without saying anything, that was very rewarding. And it doesn't always happen exactly that way, but if you can make your song match what you're trying to tell the person and get that point across, it's very rewarding. And if you're not thinking about which finger do I use and what's the name of this note, all that stuff just is intuitive. So that's how I came up with the concept for the Intuitive Guitar Academy. Is the goal is to where like learn the instrument and then you can play whatever you want. So
Cool, man. Well, I'm so glad we finally got to connect and we got our times right. And I hope everything works out great. And you're on a cruise ship recording a video.
yeah, I'll do a little. I'm trying to like flood the interweb, do TikTok things, and there's all these algorithms that people tell you like, oh, you got to do this and this and this, and it's like, and I'm trying to learn all of that as I go, and try and be more techie, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So,
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
but
Yeah,
yeah, I
it's
may
tough with
throw a
the
little
internet.
something. Yeah, on the cruise ship, I may throw a little something up there. So
All right, man. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming on here.
well, I appreciate you working with me to get me back on, and I enjoyed chatting with you. And I will send lots of people your way to watch the podcast, hopefully. So,
All right. All right.
all
Thanks,
right.
man.
Thanks. All right. Have a good one.
You too.
All right.